This is a brief summary of how to keep a field journal based on the Grinnell System. Joseph Grinnell, who lived from 1877 to 1939, developed a popular methodology that is still used by many scientists and amateur naturalists. Grinnell's method is very specific, but can be adapted to what is required by a teacher, professor, or the journal keeper's personal goals. A lot of folks use the Write in the Rain book. This is small enough to fit in my pocket, so it's easy to take along with me to a park or outside. But you can also make your own journal by taking a 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, cutting it in half, and then folding it hamburger style and stapling it together. For the journal, you can use any journal. I like to use a journal that has bullets or lines so that I can keep my notes nice and neat. I prefer to set up my journal with my name and contact information just in case it gets lost. I also like to include a key, my observation checklist, and a table of contents at the beginning of my journal so that I don't get lost as to what I'm writing down. For my key, I'll write that I'm using a squiggly line under the common names for species. I'm using an underline for scientific names and a star for indigenous names. For my pocket notebook, as I go out in the field, I'm going to open it up and start a new page. So I'm going to write the location of where I am, the date, so the day, month, year, and day of the week, and then the time that I arrived at the location and the time that I leave the location. There are also 3 important sections for noting quickly so that I can come back later and write more things in detail. The first is weather. Some important notes for that are that I'm going to be recording temperature, cloud types, a wind rating using the Beaufort scale, and precipitation. I'm also going to write some key features that I notice while I'm in the location. Species, this is where I would go more into depth about which species I'm seeing. So this would be flora and fauna, i.e. like plants and animals, whatever I happen to see. So the important thing to remember here is that this is just a quick note of what I see, and the important things to note are going to be weather, key features, and species. The next step is to transfer the notes that I've taken from my little notebook into my bigger notebook. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create a margin for myself. I believe that it's supposed to be 1 inch on one side and 1 inch on the other side, but I don't really want to measure it exactly, so I'm just going to leave myself about 5 squares. In the upper left-hand side of the page, write my first and middle initial along with my last name. Underneath that, I'll write the year. Now to start my entry, I'm going to write the date again, if I can spell. Underneath that, the day of the week. If there weren't a whole bunch here, it would be easier. I'm just going to write it down here. Next to the day of the week and the date, I'm going to write the time that I visited, which we said was 3 to 4. Next, I'm going to go a little bit more in depth with my location. This is where I'm going to be writing my indigenous land acknowledgement, the name of the place or park that I visited, an address, or a latitude and longitude, depending on how fancy you want to get, and how did I get there. It's important to write any kind of like history of the place. Say my backyard used to be where a dam was or where a garbage dump was, so I will say this is a restored garbage dump. Next, I'm going to write the weather. Say it was 75 degrees Fahrenheit. I wish. I'm going to say what type of clouds I saw. So let's say I saw cumulostratus clouds. An important thing to remember too is that this should all be in complete sentences so that someone else can understand later on what you're writing about. But for now, I'm just going to take some quick notes so that you get the idea. So you get the temperature, and then cumulostratus. Maybe I saw some chemtrails, but the sky was mostly clear. It was approximately 0 on a Beaufort scale. No wind today. Okay, next up we have the key features of your location. Essentially, what type of habitat you're looking at. Is it a forest? Is it a wetland? And what are some key features that you notice about earth, water, plants, animals, or other distinctive features? Once you give kind of a general description of the place overall, you're going to touch on the specific species that you saw. Let's say that I saw a great blue heron. I'm going to start with a narrative description and give a description of at least 3 species. I'm gonna look back at my key, know that I'm gonna squiggle the common name. I don't know the indigenous name, so I'm going to look that up later. If it were something not a heron that I could get up close to and measure, then I could give it size in centimeters or meters, because science likes to use the metric system. Once I've finished 3 or 4 narrative descriptions of different species, I'm going to include my complete species list. This is going to be a list of all of the species that I saw in one day. Here's a species list from when I visited Union Bay Natural Area. So as you can see, I have underlined as squiggly the common name, and then I have underlined with a straight line the scientific name, and something that I'm missing here is the indigenous names of the species that I would put a star by. In conclusion, this specific method can seem very detail-oriented, a lot of little pieces that have to be in the right place, but for me, the best part was actually drawing the birds, animals, and plants that I came across. Drawing is very meditative and mindful, and being able to draw those species helps me get more in tune with nature and get in tune with my senses. Even if I am just stuck in my own neighborhood or in my own backyard, I can find little ways of observing things more carefully so that I can appreciate them a little bit more. That's how to nature journal according to that specific method. This journal I actually made when I was a unit leader for a 3rd grade Girl Scout troop for 1 week at day camp. I made them all journals, and then we just drew a picture of what we saw and took a few little notes. I think that this way of doing it might be a little bit more approachable than doing a very in-depth version, but again, it's to your comfort level and also to how much time you might have to actually be in the field and actually go outside and do these things. For me, really, it's just about having fun. So, have fun.